Well, why don't we get started? This is our fifth meeting of the steering committee. We have a lot of ground to cover today. Our goals are to keep working on key components of the plan and to review what we're calling the International Interconnection Hubs, kind of our new name for Global Internet Hub, and I'll explain that as we talk this morning. But we've identified the ones that we really want to go deep on, and then update the planning schedule. I don't think we're going to need the entire 2 hours, but we want to keep this thing going and really start now working towards what the plan's going to look like. And so we're going to begin by just taking you through some of the media coverage that we're getting. We're pretty excited about it, but Greg is going to share some of the best hits of just how we've been elevating the awareness of this whole cause as well as our work, and then get into some growing insights. We were really fortunate to attend the IEIC conference in Henrico that Henrico County sponsored, but it had folks from the Global Internet Hub and hubs and the digital infrastructure world from all over the world there. And so we had a full day of just taking as many notes as possible. And so we want to share the highlights of that. And then share with you some concurrent studies that are going on that we're going to benefit from, and then work on our strategic plan as a group. Some of the what we're thinking is a table of contents and goals and some emerging strategies that still yet to be informed, but we really want to start packaging all of this and getting a head start on that. And then that includes an asset map that we talked about last time, but we've got some more thinking on that. And then end with just some details on the project management, and then answer any questions throughout all of this. So again, probably not 2 hours worth, but we certainly have a lot of ground to cover. So I want to, is there a question? I want to remind everybody that our website is designed to be really robust. So I just want to keep pointing you there in our meeting materials. And if you miss a meeting, you can go back and get a recording of the meeting, and you can see the decks that we use, and as well as the inventory of research that we've been building. And I really want to encourage you, if there's any study that's remotely related to this cause, please send it to us so we can post this. We're mining all of these studies on relevant information to put into our plan. And again, this is going to be a legacy, sort of this repository of studies is what Go Virginia is going to share our plan in this database with other regions across Virginia to really encourage the entire Commonwealth to follow our trail and being more strategic about all of the assets and bringing them together. So speaking of bringing it all together, I thought this one slide would be helpful. This is our process. And we started with this core planning group that was inspired by the Marseille guys to say, do a plan. We got money from Go Virginia, and it got matched by 6 different organizations. And then we formed the steering committee, which you guys are part of. And then we did the first work on that situation review, and we identified all those questions under the 10 characteristics of global internet hubs. And that's sort of been our guide to let's answer these questions and really explore the hypotheses that we've come up with. And so here we are in this emerging strategy section, and it's being informed by us mining that research I just shared with you, that long list, but also our own due diligence, especially in the ROI world, trying to figure that out. And then your input and suggestions have been great. And then you're going to hear the highlights from the IEIC conference, and then input from these 2 concurrent studies. We'll go into detail about what they're doing. And then we've got telegeography hired, and you're going to hear today from John, and then also Interglobix, and you'll hear from Vinay. I think Vinay's calling in from like Singapore or somewhere, but we'll hear more about their plans. And that's going to lead us to this draft strategy and strategic plan, and everybody will have a copy of that to review, and we'll have a meeting on what you think needs to be improved there and beefed up, or what's missing. And then we'll get to the final plan, and then that's going to be packaged in a beautiful format with a map in the middle of it. And then we plan to send it to the General Assembly members and other stakeholders, make plenty of really, great quality copies of it, but then also use it for our grant back to Go Virginia and others on what we have to fund to really move us along in the direction our plan spells out. So I just hope that was helpful, but that's kind of what we're doing. So any questions up to this point or discussion about this? Everybody come to the right phone call? All right, well, I appreciate everybody's help. We're on this journey together. And one of our strategies at the very beginning was let's not wait to the end to tell people about what we're doing and how important the digital infrastructure is to Virginia and into the I-64 Innovation Corridor. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg to just share a little bit of the coverage we've been getting. And all of it is on our website as well under media. So Greg?
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Yes, you know, the last several months, the whole idea has been trying to, as we're building this plan, our strategic plan, is to educate the public. We need to educate them as to what's going on, give them a sense of our digital assets that we have here. Next slide, John. And what's interesting is here's some on our website, as John mentioned. I post all these various stories about what's happening with the Global Internet Hub or other digital assets that we have. And some of these, which I'll go into a little bit further, some of these are as a result of our Innovation Spotlight series that we've been highlighting this fall. And I'll go into more details about that. Next slide, John. So let me give you a backstory here. You know, this summer, a lot of former colleagues of mine or friends have been asking me, well, what exactly are you doing with RVA 757 Connects? And, you know, I've told them about, you know, this Global Internet Hub. Well, what is that? They didn't understand it. I said, we've got these subsea cables coming into Virginia Beach and they come all the way up to Henrico County. Really, that's fascinating. So I got to thinking, we need to do a better job. And that's one of the reasons why John hired me, was to be able to provide more information about what's happening. So I was able to convince one of the page designers at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, where I used to work, to do a full page infographic on the digital connection here in Virginia, from the subsea cables coming in from Virginia Beach and the data centers that we have both in down Virginia Beach as well as in Henrico County. So that's the September 24th issue of the Times-Dispatch, the Insight section, which a lot of people obviously have mentioned to me since then about how they just found it fascinating about this whole subsea cables. They were always under the impression that all the internet traffic came from satellites. They didn't realize it came from subsea cables. So this is part of our job of educating the public. As a result of that article, the WRVA saw that and said, hey, come on to WRVA, let's talk about a little bit more about it. So I was on 15 Minutes back in September, about a week later, with WRVA interviewing me about the whole subsea cables and this whole digital assets that we have here in the mega region. Next slide, John. And as I mentioned, you know, here are two examples of stories that Inside Business, which is part of the Virginia Pilot newspaper down in Norfolk, these are two articles that they have written off of our Innovation Spotlight series that we had this fall. The one ran a couple of weeks ago about the subsea cables, which was part of our November Innovation Spotlight. And then the second one there, which ran in October, which was part of the Hampton Roads digital link that they have going there, the fiber link. And that was a part of that happened from our innovation series that we did in early October. Next slide, John. So we had an opportunity earlier this month, thanks to Vinay and his folks at Interglobics, to be able to participate in one of their most current magazine issue that just came out in the last couple of days. And as you can see here, and you can go to our website now to see the full link of the story, but we were able to not only get comments from various stakeholders in the mega region about what this all means, but we also pulled together a timeline. It was a quick timeline, but it's a good timeline in terms of how we've grown our digital infrastructure here in the mega region. And so you can see both of these on our website. There's a link to the Interglobics article there on our website. John, next slide. So as I mentioned, the Virtual Innovation Spotlight series that we've had, we started this earlier this year. And the whole idea behind the Virtual Innovation Spotlight was to spotlight different innovations that are taking place in the mega region. We decided to shift that a little bit this fall to focus solely on our global internet hub and our global internet assets that we have in the mega region and different aspects of them. So in September, we did one on the QTS data center in Henrico County. They were undergoing a major expansion. So we did it and also about other data centers there in Henrico County. Then in October, we shifted to the fiber ring, the regional fiber ring that's happening down in Hampton Roads. Again, another digital asset. Next slide, John. The beginning of November, we did it on the subsea cables that are coming aboard. And we had two of our Global Internet Hub Steering Committee members participate in that, Geraldo and Greg. They did a great job in explaining to those who were on the webinar about what's happening with the subsea cables. And in fact, this was our most watched webinar that we've had so far this year. We had about 80 people listening to this again. And a lot of these people are new to this webinar. They've never been to a webinar before. So we're expanding the number of people that are actually hearing about this. And the next slide, John. And then finally, a week from today at noon on Tuesday, December the 6th, we'll have our next of our webinar series. And this one is about becoming the next global internet hub. And again, we have our two consultants that we've hired, Jonathan and Vinay. They will be the guest speakers talking about this interconnection digital assets that we have and about how we're becoming the next global internet hub. So if you haven't signed up for it, you all should be on our emailing list. Please email me and sign up for this for a week from today at noon. Next slide, John. I think that's it. So are there any questions or?
Hey, Greg, it's Anthony. It's Anthony from Henrico. That previous slide, Vinay's picture, I think that was when he was on the cover of People magazine. No, I wanted to thank you for pushing the RTD because that print, we've actually, we've used that electronically. We keep printed copies here in the office and, you know, everybody's seen our 3-minute video 100 times. And between that and the document that you had the RTD put together, it's just a really nice summary. And we have used it and will continue to use it. So thanks for doing that.
Sure. Thank you, Anthony, for saying something.
And for you guys, you know, y'all are insiders for the most part. You really know this category. And so if there's another story angle that we're missing that would be useful, that would be great. We're planning to get Virginia Business Now engaged, so they will do a story when we finally come out with the plan, and the story for that. And we feel good about our preliminary discussions with them. But the way we envision using all of this is that, you know, when you talk to people who aren't on these calls or on this committee and who didn't go to that conference in Henrico, they just don't have a grasp of how important this topic is and what it will do for us. So we plan to package all the articles as part of the delivery of the plan. So just imagine being an elected official in the General Assembly and you just don't get this plan just dropped out of the sky, that you actually see all this buzz going on about it. So it really provides the context that this is something important. And so that's why Greg's work is so important in tandem with our strategic work on the plan itself. And
also, John, let me just add too, that a lot of the people that are showing up at our innovation spotlights are elected officials from, you know, Virginia Beach or from Norfolk, New Kent County, James City County. Either they're elected officials or appointed officials that want to know what's going on about the Global Internet Hub and our digital assets.
Yep. Good. So we got to just keep going on that route. But thanks for all your hard work, Greg. I think the momentum with media relations always picks up. So I'm looking forward to more articles. All right. So growing insight.
Hey, John,
yep.
If I could just say one thing.
Yes, please.
I thought that the title of the one was fabulous. The digital port.
Yes.
Because it kind of connects to everything that people are thinking about Virginia having a port.
Yes.
And now if we're sort of in the forefront of the digital port as well, I think that's really a great metaphor.
Great. Yeah, a great metaphor. Yeah, and connection. And so, Bob, thank you for making that point. And I hope everybody knows Dr. Holsworth on the call and on our committee. And what you probably don't know is that he's a really incredible writer. And so he's going to help us actually in writing the plan when we come through with all of the contents we want to include, and we start actually creating a written document that Dr. Holsworth has done so many of these documents that have really made a difference in Virginia. So he's going to be part of our team at that point, as well as staying on our committee. But we're really thankful for that. Okay. Well, let me go into these three topics here, the sort of growing insights. And the first one is highlights from the conference. And then we're going to have John and Vinay talk about the interconnection hubs that we really want to go deep on, and then give you an update on these concurrent studies that are really going to be helpful to integrate into our work. And the study teams know about us and are excited that that's going to happen. So it means we have to slow down just a little bit, but that's okay because the content they're going to have is going to be tremendous and it's just perfectly aligned to what we're trying to do. So this conference, I know some of you were there, and Anthony, you planned it, and it was amazing, and it was a first-class event. It started off the night before with all the speakers and VIPs at a lovely dinner, but then the full day was just amazing, and it was sort of built around a celebrity in the industry, Vint Cerf, who's the recognized father of the internet. If you go to Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge, but works for Google and just as a person that's been at the very beginning of everything digital and the internet. And so he was great as a kickoff speaker and set the tone. But then we had just an amazing lineup. I mean, think about doing this strategic plan right now, what it would have cost in time alone to fly around the world to talk to all these people. But they all came to us. So we had Greg and Laura there, and we were all taking notes. I filled up an entire notebook of notes from what everybody was saying. And so we thought it'd be helpful just to take you there efficiently and to give you the top 10 takeaways, if you will, that have something to do with what we're trying to do with the strategic plan. And I'll call on any of the folks that were there to build on what we're saying. We come at it sort of from a lay perspective, but again, we were thinking about our strategic plan. So the first one was, what this is all about is this exponential rise in data. And Dr. Cerf started off with just talking about where we're headed. And I think a lot of us know this intuitively, but just how much data is going to be generated by the devices in our homes, by the cars we drive, and by the future of all of our companies and all the industries. It's, a digital backbone is going to be key to the future. And all those charts you see with the explosion of data, he just reinforced it over and over and over again. And for me, it was kind of the emotional side of the sell that we should really set up the plan with that. The reason that we really are doing all this is to meet the goals we have, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but it really is to take advantage of this explosion that is underway. So I thought he did a great job of that. The second thing was this idea of co-opetition, this new word. It's kind of a funny looking word, but it's competitors working together and cooperating. And that was a huge takeaway for us. It's like, all these 35 folks that were the speakers, they fly all over the world, like on almost a weekly basis. And they're constantly working with each other as, in a cooperative manner to figure out how does a rising tide lift all the boats. And it just was so clear that this is the way this market happens. So our plan's got to help position this innovation corridor as the home to yes, that everybody understands this industry, that the decision makers, and that we, to do that, keep creating opportunities and frameworks, much like that conference was. It really was an agora, a marketplace in a way for people that do deals. but how do we continue to position ourselves like that and build on the great thinking that Anthony had and Vinay and pulling off this conference. So it's just something that is defining this market, this co-opetition. And then number 3, which was just astounding, this market moves really fast and often on handshakes. One speaker speculated that 80% of the shared terrestrial networks are not papered, if you will, with contracts. It's handshakes between the owners that people are trying to build their network, and they're trading with one another, and they're making their networks available. It's just it's felt like a little bit like the Wild Wild West, but I think that's sort of the infancy of the market, that it's just taken off. And so we've got to really make sure that our plan educates constituents, especially city and county governments in the corridor, about the characteristics of the marketplace. That, and Vinay has told me this many times, it's like, you got to get to yes real fast or they're going to move on. And so we want people to stay here and do the deals here. And so the idea that we've talked about in the past of a toolkit or some kind of educational program that's a formal program that we can take to all the jurisdictions just makes total sense to me when I heard this sort of language coming from the stage. And then being carrier, cable, data center neutral. I mean, that word was probably the most often used word at this conference. And I didn't understand it until they put it into perspective, that Marseille's rise was really when they said they're going to be international digital infrastructure connection hub that's going to be a neutral landing site for their subsea cables. And that was a new idea being executed in the industry a decade ago. But now it's become the catchword of that's what you want. So we had to somehow in our plan reinforce that when other people are reading our plan that are potential investors and hyperscalers and so forth, that they really understand that we understand this term and that we are doing everything we can to reinforce this positioning in the market. And then,
John, just to add to that on the neutrality part, 4 of those 35 speakers have been here at the Capacity Asia conference in Singapore. Today was the first day, which was focused on subsea, and there was a panel on subsea and data center convergence and neutrality when it pertains to data centers, carriers, and even internet exchange points was a key theme. And it is just so pivotal when it comes to building successful interconnection hubs. So I just thought I'd mention that and share with the team that was a recurring theme here as well.
That's great. So we got to figure out how do we incorporate that into our plan? How can we position the whole corridor as that, with neutral in all caps? The 5th point is something that I'm particularly interested in, and Vinay and Interglobix is going to really explore this in the qualitative interviews of 10 interconnection hubs around the world. A lot of this is, does it happen by accident, or is there this magic hand behind it pushing deliberately, and Adam Smith always says, well, it's that invisible guiding hand. Well, I wondered if it's like, no, not invisible. They're like 5 guys that are really making it happen. And so I've asked a lot of the folks at this conference, and I started to get these stories, and I said, this is great, because this is what our strategic plan's about. It's about making this happen faster than it will on its own. And Hong Kong is the best story. That there's not a lot of property in Hong Kong left. That's like waterfront. I mean, it's just all taken. And so a lot of the folks in the digital infrastructure world in Hong Kong said, we got to create a spot for more subsea cable landing points and make it neutral. So let's all chip in and find a spot and then advertise it, market it. And when these cables come ashore, we've all helped build this one spot and finance it, but then it's open market. You go after it if you're a terrestrial network or data centers, but let's be intentional about getting us more property, more real estate, so we can grow our off deep sea cable, subsea cable market. And that's what they did. So Vinay is gonna probably put a lot more color to this story and others, but it just validated the intention of our work to understand. We got to understand what have other people done that have accelerated their ascendancy. So that's our strategic plan implication is we got to package these stories in our plan to give people confidence if they invest in the plan in a significant way that great things will happen because they've been happening across the world. It's not an accident. And I'll pause after each one if anybody wants any comments on it, but that was a great takeaway for us. And then the subsea cable network today is not it's not optimal. And that sounds weird to say, but I learned this new axiom in the digital infrastructure industry. It's like, you know, the layer underneath will always be there, implying that it's just growing robust layers. And so you can always count on the layers underneath. And the one exception is the subsea cable market, that most of the cables are at the end of their useful 25-year lifespan. So that's this race to get more subsea cable locations and invest in the fastest, newest technology, which really sets us up. And you know, Virginia Beach was identified as a great option because of Hurricane Sandy and what happened in New Jersey and New York and consequently in Europe. They said they have to diversify. And so this is just, I think, a good news for us. And so Virginia Beach has got 3 in place, 1 other about to get turned on to South Africa, and then 4 more permits just approved. So it has an opportunity to become the East Coast city with the largest number of subsea cables. So I think that's terrific for us and really leverages something that we're learning now. And then accidents happen. Let's be smarter. And this really made us think back to the great presentation from the Virginia Maritime Association with their grid work. But there was a wonderful story that we heard, maybe not wonderful, but certainly informative about a commercial freighter that a little bolt on an anchor broke. And the anchor went to the bottom and it cut 3 subsea cables that connected the UK to North America. And so we just need to be thoughtful about this. And I think that's the intent of the Virginia Maritime Association's plan. And that plan's part of a bigger plan that the Coast Guard has been putting in place. So that plan needs to be in our strategic plan. And what's the next steps in that, and to make sure we get everybody's buy-in on it. And then number 8, I think other people are onto this. There are many emerging international connection hubs, and there's a challenge when you start thinking about where you're going to let cables come ashore, or the coastal protection ordinances that are currently in place. Put some limits on landing sites. So I think that there's some places that are saying yes, and there's some what's called embryo landing sites. It just might have 1 cable, like Myrtle Beach falls into this, but where does this go? And so we really have to value the work that we're going to get from Interglobix and telegeography, this understanding both established places that are on that list at the top 10, but also up and coming places, like who is going to be our competitors. And in particular, one of the deliverables from Jonathan is going to be, what does the future of the East Coast look like, and potential landing sites, and what's that activity? So I think that's now even more important to our strategic plan after understanding the discussion about the East Coast.
I'll make a quick note about that, John, if I could.
Yes, please.
And I'll be certain to pass this part of this this highlight on to Alan as well. He'll be leading up the subsea cable forecast for this part of the strategic plan. The East Coast situation is really interesting. It's very dynamic. Up until the end of 2019, 2020, we hadn't had the launch of new cables for 20 years. And at that point, we started to see new cables coming online. And half of the cables currently traversing the Atlantic are at least 19 years old. So 25 years is this typical lifespan of a system, although they can eke out more. Sometimes they'll decommission before that time is up. So there's still opportunity for new growth, even though we've started to see a major growth spurt in the new systems coming online. And the other thing that's interesting there is that the original systems crossing the Atlantic would have been intensely carrier driven in terms of the strategy of where they were deploying and why. And now, while carriers are still very key partners, a lot of the specific strategies being driven by major content providers. So that kind of changes things a bit. And I know that Alan will be able to shed some, hopefully some useful light on that for you all.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. And you can probably help on this next point, but it's something that I've always scratched my head on, that, going to South Africa, I mean, I've been to Africa a lot, and I was just like, do we really have that many communications back and forth, that many companies and with Virginia? And so I didn't understand it until one of the speakers shared this idea that it's true that just about all of the internet traffic travels on these deep subsea cables, but it's really about the user experience and maintaining data speed and having redundant systems. And so it's just a big, huge international network. And you might be on Facebook and you're looking up a friend, and 99% of your friends are all within the same state that are on the Facebook accounts, but that doesn't mean the traffic always stays in Virginia, that these big hyperscalers need the redundancy, need to ensure the same kind of user experience. And that's what some of this makes sense for having the different markets in different countries. It's all interconnected in a way that I now have a better understanding of. And so I don't know, John, if I got that right.
Yeah. I guess what I would add to that, when you look at the subsea cables, they are part of a much broader network. It's about connecting end users. It's about connecting business. It's about interconnecting networks, and that's the subsea nodes are just a part of that. They're a very key part of that, and in some cases they are the gateway to a much wider array of interconnection between continents. So that endpoint, Virginia Beach or South Africa or Marseille, is not the destination necessarily. It may be if the networks can meet in those places, but networks are traversing routes that come from all sorts of continental places to meet there as well. So like if you look at South Africa or really along the coast of Africa, when you see the growth in subsea cable development in Kenya and Nigeria and South Africa, we've also seen a concurrent growth in dark fiber traversing nations within Africa to reach to those points. So, that connectivity doesn't end there. It's enabling the distribution of network connectivity to a much wider array of users across the continent. And that's no different here. So yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of what drives the initial development in these systems is basically creating international gateways for much wider connectivity. These are the international gateways, but then the tentacles spread out much further. But along with that, you can have a robust growth in the local ecosystem where those nodes are created. And I thought one of the more interesting comments in the conference, the IEIC conference, was when Craig Waldrop talked about the symbiotic relationship between the international networks and the local networks. When you saw the development of Marseille, that was for international connectivity. It was allowing users in Africa and in Asia and elsewhere to come and interconnect closer to where they were without having to backhaul all the way to Frankfurt or Paris. At the same time, you have networks pulling down to Marseille to meet them. That happened because networks were then coming from elsewhere in the European continent to drive down to Marseille to meet them. But at the same time, you see this symbiotic growth in the local ecosystem, because where you would have these walled gardens, these monopolistic prices for IP transit in the local Marseille market, all of a sudden you have these international transit providers and carriers coming in and tanking the prices of IP transit so that they were finally starting to be more competitive. And at that point, you see this tremendous growth in the local market as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also that's what's been driving in number of markets globally, data center operators to source dark fiber and deploy it and then offer it to their customers, not necessarily getting into the network business per se, but really to alleviate those um, off the roof price points that the network carriers offering lit services have been charging. And that was another topic that was discussed today in the panel discussion. But I think I also want to make a point there, John Martin, in terms of what John was saying from telegeography about gateways, right? If you look at Marseille, and John, I had this conversation with Craig and with Mike Collins, that Marseille, people think of Marseille as, you know, an optimum location for data center subsea convergence. It's a gateway for not just for Europe, but for Africa, for Middle East, basically from a traffic routing perspective. But it is also driving a lot of local traffic, as we were discussing. So I think that kind of, you know, that's where the local dark fiber comes into play. And if you look at in our region, if you look at the Maria cable or the Dunant cable, you know, 200 terabits of traffic is not going to stay in any one data center or any one location. It's going to be distributed not just across the East Coast, but across throughout the country. How it gets there, how it reaches there, you know, it's all based on routing. It's all based on, you know, going from one network to the other. But I think it's extremely important to have that perspective that at the end of the day, these subsea cables, as much as they're interconnecting continents and countries, they're also driving local traffic.
Mhm. And that gets to the implication for our plan, because you know, when you say global, then people quickly go, well, what's in it for me? You know, and I think that Bob Holsworth's point about the ports, the port has done a good job within the business community of Virginia with its public relations efforts and positioning and storytelling, that 1 out of 10 jobs in Virginia is related to the Port of Virginia, you know, and really showing that tie back. And so that's what we've got to do with our plan, is we really got to show that we really are going to, you know, build local opportunities for all, you know, that back to that equity argument that, you know, it's going to be, we're going to become a digital port, but it really has profound implications for everyone locally. What's in it for me? Okay. Number 10, the hyperscalers and the big investment funds, and now the US government are financing the infrastructure growth. And, you know, the annual growth rate of this industry is just amazing. Whenever you look at different reports, it's over 10% a year, and hyperscalers are investing in for their own capacity needs. But now we're seeing this new money coming from the Jobs Act and new money specifically coming to Virginia to expand broadband. So we need to tie into that as part of our effort. I know the General Assembly and the governor are really focused on broadband access, and Virginia is frankly one of the better states in this, but we've got to connect our plan to this as another way of making equity happen and internet access. I think it's just another way to elevate the importance of funding our final plan. And then number 11, and this was a theme that we heard throughout, that the digital infrastructure industry isn't attracting young people. And, you know, I know just demographically, it's a challenge for every industry because we're just not producing as many young people in the population makeup. Our population, you know, pyramid is shifting to a population rectangle. We're going to have just as many people over 65 as we will under 18 by 2030. So it's a problem for everybody, but in particular, a lot of folks from the podium said, you know, we've got to do a better job with, in particular, our undergraduate degrees and make them not just all science oriented, have some liberal arts oriented, like get a, you know, computer science is not as a BS, but as a BA. And I know ODU is working on this and working with Virginia Beach and thinking about different curriculums, and the folks at VCU who are at the conference talking, they're doing some work with the C3 lab, and William and Mary is trying to enhance its curriculum with more data analytics, and Virginia Union and others. And so it just, to me, after hearing this really consistent theme that we need to inventory and have in our plan what the jobs really are going to be, and what the training needs to be, and really have this as one of our tenets. And one of the things that VCU did, and we'll expand on this in future meetings, but they, in the Greater Washington Partnership, which is another mega region effort between Baltimore, Washington, and Richmond, in the Washington-Baltimore market, they really want to be a tech center, and they put together a badging or certification program to train people with any background how to be much more technologically oriented in their careers. And so that whole program exists, and we want to find out the success of that and see, is that something that could be brought to bear here in the corridor. So anyway, just another theme that came out of this, in attracting young people into this industry. And then the last point is kind of the theme of our whole work. But we heard it from the speakers that the digital infrastructure industry is really starting to integrate. That when it was first started, it was just really siloed and different efforts, people behind the cables and people behind the data centers. There wasn't a movement towards integration. The industry has evolved in a short time to this point. And so we really need to position, I think our plan is this shining example of the industry's maturation, that we, that here in Virginia and in the corridor, we really are about, and the strategic plan is about integration. How do we tap into the alchemy of everybody working together? And I think that was, Anthony, when we first started talking, that you intuitively said, yeah, if we can get everybody to the table, that would really help us. So. All right. Well, I hope that was useful. Again, we just took away the insights from our humble backgrounds, but it really validated for us that we're on the right track, and this plan really will serve an important purpose. Any final comments before we go on?
Hey, John, it's Scott Brown.
Yeah.
How are you doing? So I know one of the things discussed during that subsea panel that I was on, one of the gentlemen brought up Starlink, and I know Greg has referenced satellites. Let me give you some numbers to show you how it's the perception and the reality is radically different. Starlink has 700,000 customers right now in 32 countries. If you took an average, that's 22,000 people per country. I know they're heavily weighted in the US. They have 3,236 satellites in operation and are planning on 42,000 to make it fully functional. But if you look at the numbers because the gentleman was implying that Starlink was going to be a huge moving factor to connecting the digital divide. And while it's a fantastic thing, they're doing incredible stuff. But if you just look at what's missing in Virginia, 22,000 people, that's one little town.
Right.
So those numbers are just exponentially don't match between what is needed, and it is going to fill a sliver, but it is not going to fill the bucket. I mean, it is just a small fraction of what's needed. So the perception of satellite and how communication is delivered is just, it's confusing a lot of people, because I've heard several people say the same thing, that satellite is going to be, the digital divide savior. And
Right.
it's only a fraction. And they've gotten 700,000 customers in a couple of years now. I think it's 2 years they've been up and running. So just filling the gap is it's just not achievable from that kind of solution.
Okay.
But how they were talking about the subsea cables, and everybody was thinking satellite is going to be a big change in that. And it's simply not. It's not capable of being that change.
That's terrific. Thank you for adding that. And Anybody else that was at the conference, if, any other points you thought were important like that one, please share it now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think, John, it's important to reiterate that that statistic is from FCC. It's actually 99.7% of all international data traverses through subsea cables. And, I mean, satellites have a place. They have a very specific niche. But when it comes to scale, when it comes to capacity, when it comes to cost, it's just there is just the mismatch between terrestrial fiber, physical fiber, and satellite-based solution is so tremendous that it's just unfathomable to bridge that in the near future. Price point, also the scale is extremely important here. When we talk about satellite-based connectivity.
Okay. Anybody else was at the conference? Did we?
John,
Patrick,
it's-
you had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce the comment, and it's not for satellite or 5G or fixed wireless alone. The physics of the spectrums for those transmissions are such that the scalability will hit limits, whether it's 3,000 satellites or 20,000 satellites. They run out of capacity, and all of them, including when you have a web of small satellites around the world, require the scale and capacity of fiber for the backhaul. So while I think that 5G and fixed wireless and satellite all have important places and roles to play, they are not substitutes for fiber to the premise for most people going forward. They are substitutes for when fiber to the premise isn't available. So from a capacity point of view, part of the strategic plan, I think, should address the positives of all forms of wireless, but also the ultimate limitation, because we will be asked constantly, well, isn't 5G going to make this obsolete? Isn't satellite going to make this obsolete? Isn't fixed wireless going to make this obsolete? And I can tell you on the Eastern Shore, which is very flat, if you're on the backside of a loblolly pine, you do not get wireless signal because it turns out that not only do they have leaves all year and block the signal, but their needle length is a fractional antenna of the most common frequencies. And so it creates 250,000 radiators per tree for your signal to be scattered. So all of this wireless has a place, but it all has a serious limitation.
Okay. Scott?
You have one quick point to that 5G, and I think it's easily glazed over. 5G is only down. The other signal's 4G, and they don't have for several years. They're not going to be implementing 5G up because it's such limitation of communication. The throughput is so limiting for distance. So even though on a good 5G, if you're doing video conference, you're still limited to 4G capability, which if it's more than one person is simply not achievable in a video stream on a single device.
Hey, John, it's
Yes.
Anthony. I think your summary is excellent. Thank you for doing that. I would have a couple of observations, and one is just the concentration of the brain power that made it to Short Pump, that made it to Virginia. And Vinay put the agenda and recruited all those folks to come, and it was just just the fact that people were willing to fly from 6 different continents and I don't know how many countries to come join us. I think that one of the big challenges, Greg and I have talked about this, is that while we had this event and we had the Taylor Swift, we had the Kim Kardashian of the digital infrastructure world. I mean, we had superstars here. and there was no local coverage. Absolutely no local media coverage. And I promise you, it wasn't for want of trying and even a little begging. And so I think that, you know, what you guys are working what you guys are working on in terms of telling the story, the industry gets it. I think the business community is beginning to get it. But telling that story to citizens, elected officials, the thing that Greg worked on with the RTD, I mean, things like that, it's going to be a really communicating this effectively and getting people's attention, I think, is going to be one of our biggest challenges. And so for me, that might be the 13th takeaway from the day, is that we just have to really work hard and figure out how we can tell this story in a way that it's going to resonate.
Yeah. Great point.
So you're saying basically we've got to prepare presentations and press releases for the media, for them to get their interest up.
We did that, and still it was crickets. Now, it was on election day, so our timing wasn't great in that regard. We were competing with you know, other things in our state and in our country. But even still, the lack of media interest, local and regional media interest, was really surprising. And we really did spoon feed it to them. We did a press release. We provided all of the background on the speakers, and just didn't connect. So it's something we're going to have to work on.
Great.
And Anthony's, to your point too, I helped out as well. I tried reaching out to several local media people to try to get them there at the conference as well, and just couldn't. It was crickets, as you said. A lot of it had to do with election day, they said, and they're also all short-staffed these days.
One other thing I'll mention, John, if I can, that I forgot, but for those of you that were there, you will remember the presentation that Secretary Lynn McDermott made, which for me was one of the highlights of the day. And I think that she was there to recognize or to be a part of the ribbon cutting for the DKIX Richmond exchange. But her remarks were very personal, very heartfelt. And I think that she offers really a substantial, could be a real advocate for us at the highest level when it comes to building this regional global internet hub.
Yeah. I second that. I talked to her at the end, and she was incredibly impressed and wants to help. As you know, we do have the Secretary of Finance, Stephen Cummings, is part of our group. So I think once we get our plan, we're gonna be able to tell the story and point to things that are going to be helpful. So I think that's going to be great.
On the talent
Anybody else?
development,
Yeah.
I would add that the governor's proposal for his talent pipelines, and in addition to what you've already mentioned that's out there in terms of training and skills, I've learned that the Chamber of Commerce, with more than 1,000 manufacturers, has a whole series of internships and certification programs that, like the Baltimore-Washington corridor, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on the training programs. They're out there. We need to vet them, adapt them for ourselves, and get them implemented. But both in the direction of Go Virginia and the governor's plans right now, they mesh with our needs.
Yes. Great point.
Oh, I should raise my.
All right. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on unless anybody has one last comment. We're all good. Okay. So now we're going to move to the interconnection hubs that we want to explore and go deep on. And I just want to remind everybody we went through the RFP process. We settled on telegeography and interglobics, and scopes of work are similar, but we're taking two different paths. Telegeography is going to tap into its enormous database, and John's going to explore 10 different global internet hubs, and or what we're calling internet connection points or interconnection hubs. And that's more of a quantitative data mining, and all the insights will have this data backing it up for us. And then Vinay is taking a different approach, still going to do 10 of these cities, interconnection hubs, but it's going to be, we're calling it qualitative. It's going to be interviewing people and asking for their studies or their plans, and in particular, understanding how they assess ROI, but really talking to people like we did with the guys in Marseille, and really trying to understand that intentionality, really coming back with the details on that Hong Kong story, for example. And so in working with these two guys and putting together, sort of the final approaches, we just started to realize that, the global internet hubs, that term, it's really sexy when you just hear it. You kind of want to know what's going on there. But when telegeography does the rating of these, it's really kind of a one-dimensional rating in terms of volume, and John can explain this in a minute. And so when we start to think about what are we really trying to do here, we're really trying to make our corridor evolve faster than it will on its own with intentionality. So just simply using this list might not get us all the best insights. And so John and Vinay and my team, we've been talking about this and said, we ought to just really go back to what we're trying to do, which is to have a killer plan that can really work to drive us forward. So let's just not go blindly into saying these are the 10 markets. Let's look at the whole world and say, what are some established hubs that are on this list? And certainly let's understand how they rose and evolved and where the intentionality was. But let's also look at some up and comers that maybe are right with us now or just a little bit ahead of us. And really, what are they doing? And they're not quite on this list, but yet they'd have more insights for us. So we've established these two categories, and we've got overlap of 5 cities, but we've got a slightly different list for telegeography and for interglobics. And I want both of these guys just to share a little bit on this. So when we say go, that we have the right cities, and we'll come back and start sharing a lot of data on these lists. And what we've effectively done is expanded the list because we only have 5 overlaps. But John, I'm going to turn it over to you and just tell me on the next slide, then we'll go to Vinay.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, so we've had tremendous, I think, very productive conversations so far with the committee and Vinay and I as well. And we've had some good back and forth. And I know that we're absolutely on the same page in how we want to evaluate markets. And as John alluded to, for any of you who weren't in the committee meeting last time, we're shifting from just looking at a ranking of top internet hubs. When we rank top internet hubs at telegeography, that's just a very specific indicator of the amount of connected internet bandwidth that is connected to international destinations. It's a very specific metric, but there's far more going on in any given local market than just that. And in the interest of looking at markets that are hopefully really illuminating for the I-64 corridor and for what you all are trying to establish, we want to expand that to include a lot more markets that are regionally dynamic, not necessarily the global internet, financial, commercial hubs of the world, but places that have really intriguing similarities to your market, similar characteristics, similar potential. And so that's what we want to really flesh out in our data set. And as John also said, there is some difference in how Vinay and I will go about this, given the specific things we're doing. We're going to delve into our data set and try to illuminate what we can for you as far as indicators that are really promising in different markets. And Vinay is going to bring out some of the more qualitative things through in-depth interviews with people who have helped to establish different markets. With that said, I'm here to support you, and I want to be able to do that as well as possible. And I'm more than happy to take any feedback that you all might have on the specific list and consider any modifications that you might suggest. But that said, I think I've come up with a list of markets that would be useful. I'm going to focus on two major hubs and then spend a bulk of the time looking at some more localized markets. I chose London and Hong Kong because, like Virginia Beach, these are really intercontinental gateways. These are locations where there's a confluence of a lot of subsea connectivity, a lot of international connectivity, and frankly, it's all subsea for these locations, given their geographic positioning. These are among the biggest markets in the world. They have a plethora of everything that we're tracking in this study, everything from cloud to internet exchange to local and international network. And I want to highlight those just to show kind of the scope and depth of what it is we're tracking. And that's really the reason for including these big ones. But we'll spend the bulk of the time focusing on some more regional markets that have intriguing similarities to yours. So let's go to the next. So I chose a number of criteria in looking at these because, frankly, and as you'll see very quickly in the list that Vinay and I have, there's a lot of coverage we can do on this, and there's far more than even what we're covering here. But I wanted to do some weighted criteria looking at both the indicators that we have data for, and frankly, some of the divergence between my list and Vinay's is really given the lack of data that we have for a few of the markets that he would like to cover. But for me, it was about being able to pull in some really core metrics. So a lot of the weighting is based on the presence of these metrics, the strength of the international internet bandwidth connectivity, the co-location environment, cloud, and IX. But the biggest weight that I put on these markets had to do with their geographic positioning, and because that's what I find intriguing about your corridor. You're both an intercontinental gateway, and you are along a path to a much larger international market that's very close by. So I wanted to look at markets that had one or the other of those characteristics in common as well, and to see how they develop. So some of these are really close to much bigger markets. Some of these are along a much bigger path. Some of these are just intercontinental nodes that haven't been fully developed yet. So I put a lot of weight into those types of indicators in choosing the list. So that said, let's go to the next. And the first 4 of the 8 that we're tracking on my side are, these are all subsea gateways. The first 2 here, arguably already major hubs. I'm including them in this dynamic regional growth category, or an up and coming category, however you want to call it, really for a few basic reasons. Marseille, while by our if you were to look at our single indicator of international internet connectivity, Marseille is already there. It's massive. There's a lot of internet connectivity piping in there. The reason I think I want to put it in this dynamic growth category, though, is that it's still in a major growth phase. There's a lot more subsea cable coming in. There's a lot more international internet bandwidth coming in, and it's outpacing the growth rates of the more established markets. It continues to by a long shot. The other thing I'd say about that is that it's also very driven by a particular data center in IX ecosystem. And they're wonderful ecosystems, but they're not as large and diverse as the biggest hubs. So I want to include them as one of these growing hubs, and certainly it's kind of the gold standard for what we've all been aiming for. So I know that there will be a lot to share there. Mumbai likewise is also really large, arguably already the major hub for South Asia, of course, but still in a dynamic growth phase as well. And they've overcome a lot of hindrances, and they're still overcoming more, and there's a lot of growth in the pipeline. These last two here are more nascent in their development. Both subsea gateways. Lisbon has a couple of landing points nearby along the coast, and it really lacks some of the diversity you would find in larger markets, but there's still a lot of potential there. Barcelona, we've started to see activity coming in with cloud connectivity and data center and IX. And that's really supporting what we're seeing coming down the pike with a couple of really major cables, content-driven cables that are coming online there. So we'll take a look at those. In the next slide, we're going to look at 4 other markets. I lumped these into other vibrant market category. These aren't necessarily subsea gateways. Well, these are not subsea gateways, but they have really intriguing characteristics as well. Sofia, I've found intriguing for the last couple of years. It's a small market, but it's really outsized. It's absolutely a major intercontinental gateway for peering traffic. There is a tremendous amount and diversity of peering going on in this market, and I think that you'll see some really interesting things going on there. That would be an interesting example of how to facilitate the international growth within a more localized market. Looking at Malaysia, this one also intrigues me for you all in particular. This is by far the closest market to a much more major market that we're evaluating. Johor Bahru is right across the channel from Singapore, and it's connected very tightly with gobs and gobs of dark fiber running along bridges. And so it's virtually right there, but it's not, but it's in a different country. As we look at the constraints that Singapore is experiencing right now, constraints to growth because of land and power scarcity and increasing regulatory evaluation of how growth could most sustainably be facilitated in the future. It's really slowing growth more than the market would like it to in Singapore. At the same time, I think that's probably a good thing because frankly, it is quite unsustainable at the pace it's been going. But that growth has to go somewhere, and we have a lot more subsea cables coming into Singapore. I think we have at least a dozen right now that we know of. So that growth has to go somewhere, and at least some of that will almost certainly be driven into Johor Bahru and perhaps KL as well. So I think we're going to see some really intriguing examples there. And of course, that's relevant to you all because you have one of the largest interconnection markets in the world right next door. And that market also is seeing tremendous constraint right now. So this will be, I think, a very interesting example for you. Lastly, I threw in Hamburg and Manchester as well, because these are markets that are very dynamic from a local perspective, but also have international connectivity coming in. Hamburg being a strong Northern European gateway to the continent. But the local markets are really strong. You have diverse peering and a strong data and diverse data center ecosystem in both of these markets. And there's a lot of local business, enterprise tech going on in these markets. So like you, there's a tremendous potential for the local market in addition to the international. So that's why I included these as well. I think that's it for me. So yeah, that's what I have.
Do you want us to hold questions to after Renee shares a little bit, or do you want to take?
I don't care either way. Oh, I was going to mention one other thing though. As an aside, I'll probably also mention a couple of not so optimal examples. Specifically places like Cairo and Dubai and Palermo. There are good things going on in these places, but there have been tremendous hindrances to creating a truly carrier and data center neutral environment. These are places that have tremendous subsea connectivity coming into them, and the growth has not been what it could be. So we might touch on that as well. And that goes back to that whole theme of being both carrier and data center neutral. We'll focus very heavily on that throughout this.
Yeah, by the way, John, FYI, Dubai things are changing. I was there last week.
Yeah.
And I'll send you a presentation with what has evolved over the last 5+ years in terms of neutrality, in particular, how the internet traffic has grown, and also in terms of data centers. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. The potential is there, and traditionally there have been hindrances which are being overcome as we speak.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's as we see competition rising in the region, there's a lot of other places looking to capture some of that interconnection demand. What did we see a week or two ago? They finally agreed to interconnect the two major ecosystems there in Dubai, which I think has been a long time coming. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, any questions for John? Right, we can come back, but then let's Vinay will talk about his markets. All right, so let's move on to Vinay. And I love your picture so much, Vinay. We just got to keep putting it up every time. All right, so Vinay, take it away.
Okay, I guess, John, did you not get my slides that I sent to you?
Nope.
Okay.
Got the list, but no slides.
Yeah, I had
So
sent.
you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
I know you were flying home last night and sending me things from an airplane.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my email. Yeah, the email went through, but nevertheless, yeah, I'm happy to share the screen. Just
Okay.
let me pull up the slides. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Well, I hope you guys appreciate this. We've had a lot of conversations between Vinay and John and Greg and Laura and I just about this idea of not just immediately following the plan of the top 10, but really trying to be more strategic for the insights that we need. And because this is really going to inform some actions across a number of different characteristics that we identified really early on.
Yeah, there were 5 slides, John, that I'd sent, but let me just share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep. Got it.
Okay. So as John was saying, right, I mean, the easy button for us would have been to take the established global internet hubs or interconnection locations, but I think to stay true to the process and also to kind of look at how the global, I'm sorry, was someone trying to say something? To stay true to the process and also to see how the global internet landscape is evolving. I think it's extremely, extremely important to incorporate the up and coming or the emerging interconnection hubs. So, that's the approach that sort of I've taken. I mean, the one common theme that I've seen is, the convergence of data centers and subsea. the definition of data center differs, the extent of at which data center maturity level of data centers there in a particular market differs. So all of those factors, I have so far conducted one interview, which I did before my travel, which is for a region in Denmark. It's a combination of Blaberg, Endrup, and Esbjerg in terms of how it's evolving, both from a data center and subsea perspective. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And also these interconnection hubs, they're driving regional economic development, economic growth. And in some cases, the potential is there as these are international connectivity pathways that are established from a global perspective, with the emphasis being on diversity. And so the new areas that are emerging. On the emerging list, I have Barcelona, which is what John also talked about. If we look at some of the existing developments on the more recent front, like To Africa, Med USA, MedLoop, there is potential further for development there, and this is one to closely watch. I was earlier mentioning about Esbjerg in Denmark, including Endrup and Blaberg. These are sort of neighboring areas. And this development has been triggered by Bulk Infrastructure, which is a real estate, which was traditionally a real estate company, got into data center, subsequently subsea. When subsea happened, then Aquaquam landed their Hofru cable from New Jersey in the same region. Then you have hyperscalers that are going there now. So it's a very progressive development that's happening in that part of the world in Denmark. Crete is a very John Martin talk about intentionality. Just even today, I spoke with some of the folks from Interaction who are here at the conference. By the way, 4 out of the 35 speakers from IEIC are here as well. The first thing when I saw each of them was talking about the event, and they were talking about the focused conversations and the content that was there at the event, at the IEIC event. But Crete is another location where, at the very least, I would say that there is an intentional, very, very concerted effort to have it follow the Marseille model. Now, remains to be seen how successful it will be, but I put it on the list to kind of track what is going to be done, and talk to some of the folks who are involved in some of the initiatives there. Mumbai in India, which has been traditionally a telco-driven, very tightly regulated cable landing station type of environment, is evolving with new data center development, new funding that's in place. A lot of international data center companies are going there, and they're investing in subsea cables. So there is a very strong potential of further development of an open interconnection hub development versus a telco-centric or a data center operator-centric hub. Fortaleza in Brazil, Telxius and Angola Cables. Angola Cables in particular has been very ambitious in their goals. They recently, just like we had the QTS Richmond NAP, Angola Cable announced Ango NAP as a network access point in that market. And Telxius has a few subsea cables there. So again, another area to watch. And John from Telegeography, I combined Lisbon with Sines, and as I looked further into kind of what's happening in that region, you look at Eli Link, you look at Start Campus, there are these different elements that are not that far away, like roughly within an hour's drive, hour and a half's drive between Lisbon and Sines. And I think that also reminded me a lot of Virginia Beach, Richmond from that perspective as well. I think John, that was probably the comment you were making earlier about Lisbon.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. We can incorporate what we can about the broader region too. Yeah,
I think that would be very, very helpful. And then again, a very concerted effort underway by RTI Cable in terms of Guam, not just purely as a gaming hub, but also given its location, where you have Japan, Singapore, other Asian countries in the north, and then you have Australia on the south. So Guam is very rapidly evolving as a hub as well. And then looking at the established hubs, John Martin and team, I stuck to Hong Kong and Marseille. I mean, we've talked about both Hong Kong and Marseille. And I have, in fact, from Raymond Tong's team, his head of strategy was here with me on a panel today. We had some discussions about Hong Kong. I've taken some notes related to this particular project, and then added Sweden, Stockholm in particular in Sweden, with what's there today, where things are headed. And by the way, Stefan from Sweden was here as well, from I was going to say Telia Carrier, but their new brand is Aurelion. But Stefan is very well plugged into the community and into the internet infrastructure sector. So I've got Stockholm as an established hub. So that's sort of my list of 10. And I think John and team, as you may have noticed, there is an overlap, and at the same time, we've kind of kept it from the perspective of, my methodology, my process is different from John's process. But at the same time, I think we both felt it was extremely important to incorporate these emerging hubs as well, and not just look at the established ones.
Thanks, Vinay.
Yeah.
So want to open it up to questions or comments? And let me go back to my screen, Vinay, stop sharing. So this gives you a list of the overlap that Vinay just went through. Is everybody, I'm not hearing any comments. Everybody comfortable with this approach? Oh, Nancy, you have your hand up.
I actually, whoops, hold on. I actually just had a question. In the interviews and in the analysis of sort of both sets, is there some insight at a later date about two things? One would be sort of how did they organize to do this? Like, what was their process to get there? Or how are they organizing for the ones that are up and coming, quote unquote? And are they measuring outputs and so on? So again, maybe we'll get to that, but those I think would be maybe two things that would help us as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just reiterated the two core things that we want to get to. What is the intentionality that's going on? And then what is that output? I mean, in particular, jobs, so we can go back to potential grant funders for implementation dollars. Well, we gotta be able to pull some of that from these case studies.
I think you're gonna be relying a lot on Vinay for that, getting that color on what comes as a result of the development that's happening. And that's where, as we continue to hone this, I guess I have two thoughts in continuing our conversation, Vinay, on this. And we can follow up with this offline, but we'll probably want to, for the sake of continuity, come to agreement on how we want to classify Marseille. And then also, I think it's really good to have this diversity of markets, but to some degree, I'm hoping that we can flesh out a lot of these answers to questions in markets that have really gained a foothold. In some cases, we have markets here that, I think the I-64 corridor is actually further along in development. So
I think in my slides, which I projected earlier, and John, I resent you so you can have them incorporated in the final deck.
Yeah.
John from Marseille, I kind of went back and forth. I mean, most of the development there has happened within the last 5 to 7 years.
Right.
And I think it's rapidly evolved. It's still evolving in terms of if you look at the number of subsea cables that are projected to go. So is it established? Is it up and coming? Is it up and coming like Crete? No. Is it established from the perspective of Crete as well? I'm just saying, right?
Yeah.
So I think it can kind of go.
Right. Oh, it totally can.
Yeah.
There's plenty of justification both ways. And I think part of it may be how we want to consider that category. I guess I was thinking that we could use maybe not established, but just like the biggest markets as a comparison, as just to compare a benchmark of here's what a fully diverse, fully developed ecosystem looks like. Because a lot of the ones on our list, well, some of them are already really well established too. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Marseille is very well established, but it's a dynamically growing regional location, you know.
Michael, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple questions. One, I didn't recall seeing Hong Kong on the other list, but maybe I might have missed that. Is there a strategic element of connectivity, not only, well, between what we have in Virginia and some of these other Interglobix markets, such that we should look at how we're connected to them, and are there partnership opportunities, or even in these existing established markets, are there partnership opportunities that they have leveraged that we should think about leveraging ourselves?
That's an interesting point, Michael. Partnership opportunities in terms of lessons learned, in terms of
like strategic goals, even with corporate partners that may be looking to invest on, say, both sides of a subsea cable, and how we would enable that through some sort of partnership. I just don't know if that's going on or not.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like the question to me would be, would each of these sites, are they independent operators? They operate independently. And as that begins to mature, how do they look at these other markets? They look at them as competitors, peers, strategic partners, et cetera.
They're definitely not in isolation. And the players within them are the networks themselves that are trying to interconnect across the globe as efficiently as possible, or using or as diverse. There's kind of these multiple considerations, both efficient interconnection directly from where they need to be, or diversity to protect against outages. So there's lots of coordinated effort, but it raises a good point that was brought up earlier that I'd like to just reiterate. John Martin, when you talked about the whole theme in the conference of enabling the co-opetition that happens and the speed of the markets, that's really key to, I think, the answer to your question. What's happening with all of these places is that you have really nimble, rapidly moving markets establishing themselves through partnerships. The internet is basically a massive system of partnerships that's created between individual network partners, all intermeshed all over the world, and they're trying to figure out how to have as robust connectivity as possible with each other, and how to reach as many eyeballs as possible. And so a lot of what I think needs to be done in terms of intentionality, and what we see happening around the world, is that governments, people who are trying to figure out how to attract this kind of business, are setting up the infrastructure to let it do its thing, essentially, and setting up the framework to let it to allow it to operate as freely as possible. and then allowing these really rapidly moving relationships to develop with underlying infrastructure to support them, and with regulatory frameworks that reduce encumbrance and allow them to operate freely. And when that happens, it's not necessarily a specific partnership between different nodes, but a massive system of partnerships amongst operators who need to be in different places to reach eyeballs and to get there as quickly as possible. I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, it was just a thought. I mean, we talked, and you mentioned it, right? Co-opetition, and then I think, John, you mentioned how the industry is starting to integrate now as well. So it's not just about the cable providers and just the telcos and just the data centers. So if that's going to continue to mature, how does that affect, potentially the relationships globally across the space? So maybe more longer term, but I think there's probably something to think about there.
Mhm. I mean, the only way to think about your question is like, one of the takeaways from the conference was that hyperscalers lead the way, and where they are doing their studies and figuring out where to connect. And you're, I think, taking it up a notch and saying, how about, when will the markets lead the way?
Yeah, I mean, are hyperscalers going in and saying, look, I need a presence both in Europe and the US. So where,
Yeah.
do I'm going to go pick that myself, or is there basically a partnership already established that's going to allow them to rapidly drop in into both sides,
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think a lot of it is very driven by themselves. But tangential with that come all the partners that they inevitably need in order to make these projects work anyway. Even when a hyperscaler builds their own cable, they still have to have partnerships, and they're trading massive fiber pairs with carriers and with other partners. They're working with landing partners and other people on the ground. But a lot of the underlying driver for what they're doing is just they themselves saying, I need to get from data center A to data center B as fast as possible. I need a different route. I don't want to work with this consortium as much. I want to reduce dependence on that. So I'm going to do my own thing over here. And I'm going to do it somewhere that is going to encumber me as little as possible. And there's a lot of guessing as to where they go next in these kinds of scenarios. But then there's also the, it doesn't diminish the role of the carriers and the local interconnections that are happening all over the place. And that's almost separate. One other thing I would mention about the hyperscale role, and one of the things that we want to track is the increase in on-ramps in cloud regions and locations, and how that helps to build in local ecosystems. And to some degree that goes hand in hand with where they're building subsea, but not really, because that cloud reach and that interconnection is just one component, and that involves everybody. That's where you're reaching the eyeballs. But a lot of times the hyperscale builds may be to more remote locations because it's just for underlying the massive proprietary data center infrastructure that's meant to serve a vast region. So sometimes those goals don't go hand in hand with the hyperscale subsea builds and what's happening with the end user connectivity. But there is always that cloud component where they're really reaching to the end user populations as well.
My last thought on this is maybe Michael's right, though, in terms of what Anthony's already said many times, like our positioning is the fastest, lowest latency, most direct route to South Africa and South America and Europe. That's really what we're about here in this corridor. And so having relationships with sister cities and the people that are running those in this category might not be all wrong, and it also would be a great thing for this committee to take a couple of trips too, So, well, look, in the interest of time, I want to move on and cover the rest of the topics. But are you guys okay with this approach and the market selected? Is that a silence means consent here. Okay. All right. Well, great. So we'll move forward here. And then there are two concurrent studies that are going on. And I want to just make sure you guys know about these. Unfortunately, Stephen just had to drop off the call, but Virginia Economic Development Partnership has been charged by the General Assembly to do a study, and they've lined up some experts at ODU and Virginia Tech and George Mason. And this is the enabling legislation. So it's a lot of words on this slide, but I highlighted what was the most important thing. The General Assembly wants to know was like, we're providing incentives for, data centers and such. And is there a payoff? What is the indirect and direct jobs created by data center investments looking across the state? And this report's due December 15th. So when we're going to be able to tap into this big time, and I think this kind of gets to your question, Nancy, but we'll be able to pull different parts of this. It'll be public on December 15th. It's going to the General Assembly. So I'm hoping this does a great job of saying, here's the real value of data centers and builds on a lot of the data that we've seen that points to this sort of new economic development model. And that then our study comes in and says, okay, here's what to do, but this sort of creates the why, if you will. On another level, Doug Smith and the Alliance and Nancy Gurdon connected with this with reInvent, but there's a study going on in Hampton Roads about data centers as part of a larger industrial site development strategy. And so the consultant hired here has been brought up to speed on everything that we're doing. And Doug Smith has assured us is that they're going to share with us anything that's relevant to go into our plan. So these are two studies that directly support what we're doing, and we need to make sure that the timing of our plan benefits from this work. So Nancy, do you have anything to add to that? Is that?
No, I don't. And actually, the other one that we have not released is the Techonomy study that reInvent and ODU collaborated on, that talks about the concept of a data sciences cluster in the region, broadly defined. So, maybe we should align all these reports and findings into a summit of some sort here. But anyway, that's for another time. But yes, that's coming up too.
But it's just going to make our work even more robust and timely. Yeah. So we're excited about that. So I just really wanted y'all to know about it, and maybe that's something we should do, Nancy, is have everybody together for one meeting and let you guys know when it's happening to see if you want to zoom in on it. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going. This is our strategic work plan, and we do plans for a living, and so sometimes we don't wait to the very end to start working on it, because a lot of the front end stuff is just what we know in terms of like why we're doing this and who's involved and all that. So we really, and Bob Holsworth joining our sort of project team, in addition to being on the steering committee, is going to help us here. But I want y'all to look at this when you get this deck, and this is just the preliminary table of contents, but we want to, really start to put some narrative down, and particularly on parts 1, parts 2 and 3, and then that situation review we started off with, but we really are going to be informed by this work that Interglobix and Telegeography are doing, and even these concurrent studies. And that'll lead us to a SWOT that we'll do probably in 2 calls from now, and then those strategic imperatives. And so we're starting to make a list of some of these that are coming out of the research to date. But once we have them all identified, we'll prioritize them, and what's the timeline, and what are the investments related to making them happen. And then we're keenly interested in that ROI, the jobs created, and the equity for all, and what are going to be our KPIs. So we're sharing this as just a way of saying, this is the way we're thinking, and we need your help and just filling in. So as we do some hits against different parts of this, this is the mosaic that we're building. And so we've already talked about sort of the goals in earlier things. This was in our discussion in the last couple of calls, make equity a primary goal. That's really not about just creating a great infrastructure that'll benefit all the cities outside of the corridor, but really benefit all the residents and businesses in the corridor. And how do we serve all the communities, even the small ones along the corridor? And then how do we generate local jobs and this local ROI? So we need to, keep this focused and start thinking about the strategies that really will accomplish these things. And then our emerging strategic imperatives, this is not meant to be a definitive list, but this is kind of our running list of things that we're, starting to see some patterns here that, the key industry growth imperatives that are really going to benefit from this, that can help with economic development, recruiting. And then we heard about the educational needs to attract that talent and local jurisdiction, educational support. We've called it a toolkit, but some form of that. And then that broadband extension imperatives. How do we tie into all the conversation and funds that are coming into the Commonwealth and around the Commonwealth? That subsea cable maritime grid. Thought we heard something great from the Virginia Maritime Association. What actually are we going to recommend on that? Optimal tax strategy will come out of the Economic Development Partnership work, and investor infrastructure relations. To really be able to take our plan and what we're doing back to the hyperscalers and other investors. It's amazing how much like BlackRock's getting into investing in a lot of the infrastructure. The federal government infrastructure investment as well. And then that player support, advancing that greater integration. And then I mentioned it before, but that attracting talent. So we're starting to think about what, do these make sense? And with Vinay and John's help and understanding what's going on in other hubs, are they driving any of these and have insights for us to put some more meat on these? But I just wanted at this time to give you guys started the way it's starting to shape out. Obviously, when we end up with a final list of what our imperatives are, we need to prioritize them and see what would it cost us in the implementation and what would have the biggest impact on a more immediate ROI. So the last sort of topic on sort of the content is the quantifying ROI. And this is something that is critical to us, and John or Renee is really going to look at this, but these are the sources that we're thinking that we're going to be really inspired by and have some evidence. But the Alliance Study Insights, the VDP study, which is clearly on the return on data centers, our own case study research, and then hopefully some quantitative with telegeography, and then our own analysis. One of the things we want to do is maybe profile a couple of hubs in America that we can match up to job growth data across different occupations and marry it up to their, working with John and telegeography, how fast those markets have grown in measures of digital infrastructure, but then be able to show the parallel growth in jobs in particular categories and what that has meant. So maybe we can build our own little model there. And do the same on Ashburn and just go back in time with a couple of economic development databases that we can tap into. And then there's a lot of secondary research out there. This one study I thought was really interesting, looking at data centers, and everybody argues that there are only like 5 or 6 people in a data center, and we really want to go after headquarters that give you 200 to 1,000 jobs. That's really growing the impact on the local economy, on revenue. And so this is kind of the question that Economic Development Partners is asking or trying to answer right now. But this one study that is fairly recent, 2020 came out, and it really went down and looked at Loudoun and Prince William, and it said for every dollar in county expenditures in the industry, it cost to generate $15.10 in local tax revenue for Loudoun, and really helped local residents and not having their taxes raised by 21%. And the same with Prince William, that for every dollar spent, it generated a lot in tax revenue. And that saved residents being hit up for property tax increases. So, there are a lot of different ways to look at it. And we're going to try to build our own model and tap into other models we can come across and really try to make the case. And then you guys will be the judge on what's the strongest. And so that's the way we're thinking about this. And there's just article after article in different kind of studies. This is an older one, but it really got to this whole idea of just how powerful data centers are, because it really creates a whole new industry. And what we ultimately want to do is build this sort of model that the data substantiates, that really can explain this plan and what we're trying to do by way of a model. That it's not just about data centers, it's the digital infrastructure and how that attracts tech workers and grows the market and attracts businesses looking for the advantage, latency advantage, and the ability to get tech workers, and then the adjacent tech talent happens. And, it's just a success cycle, if you will. And that ultimately that gets into the story of economic development and recruiting others. And that leads to greater, investment in digital infrastructure. So I don't know if this is the perfect way to describe this. It's the best we have today, but it would be great to put some, to quantify this and to see what the other markets are talking about. And does anybody else have a model and have ROI measures in place that they're looking at that take us in this direction? And the last point is just something about, in thinking about our plan, we just got to get ready for this. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And we started to brainstorm in our last meeting what a map could look like, an infrastructure map that could be in the center of our plan, but also could be a standalone handout that says this is the current infrastructure. But if you fold it over to the other side, this is what the plan is. And here are the tenets of the plan and the goals. And here's a brief synopsis of all the things that we have to do. And so maybe that becomes the real handout and mailer that really simplifies what we're talking about. So this was what we brainstormed. And I want you guys to start thinking about this list. What else should be on this plan? Because we got to start thinking about how a map would look. And one of Virginia Beach's economic development partner, supplier, vendors has agreed to do this map for us at no cost, which would be great. But you just can't say do the map. You got to go to them and say, okay, here's everything we want on the map. And the backside is the last thing we're going to get, which is going to be the actual strategic plan. But we need to start thinking about this, because in my career, doing maps is complicated because there's so much you can put on it. And so we've started to inventory the digital assets in both markets. We'd like you to look at this. It doesn't list the commercial side, and maybe that's something Michael and others we should do, but again, it's too much to talk about in this sort of call, but these few slides here is the kind of help that we need to make sure we're really thinking like globally, but we're thinking in the 30,000 foot level of everything that needs to be included. And then just for fun, we're not artists, but we took a crack at sort of what we can share to the artists, what a map would look like, but to really be able to show the corridor, and then to have the digital assets you would think about, but also, what is that talent workforce pipeline, and what each one of the major universities and college and the community college system are doing as just a starter, and maybe with a link, and then what's happening with Dominion and then the terrestrial networks. And so how do we think about all this, the side of the map that's like, look, we really do have all this going. And then the other side is our plan. And that's almost like an executive summary. The plan would be the typical product that will go into detail on everything. But we just wanted to give you guys kind of a glimpse at our vision to see if you can help us shape it into something that's going to be easy to package in the end. So before I get into the final, just sort of wrap up on some project management details, any comments on what I just took you through? Is it? Yes, Scott?
I noticed, what about latency? And we show the assets, but we don't show the value of the assets. Why
Yeah.
that strategic position, latency to Europe, latency to South America, avoiding, the North?
Mhm.
Just thinking out loud about I know, like you said, you can pile on so many statistics and it gets to be a blur. But I think one of the key values of this region, Virginia Beach, Richmond, Williamsburg, that whole corridor, is that it's a shorter path to some of the key components of other continents.
Yes. All right, latency advantage. But look at these, we'll pull this section out and send it to everybody, this short little section, but it's time to start thinking about the table of contents and the topics we really want to make sure we cover. What we've been doing is using that list that we put together as part of the situation review. And that was a really great guide for us at the conference, trying to see, are we getting these questions answered? Y'all remember those in Williamsburg? And so now we got to start thinking about the plan. And I know we're just a little bit ahead of ourselves. We're going to learn a lot from telegeography and Vinay and Interglobics, but we've got to start thinking about how do we package all of this.
John, real quick, in light of that, and what you were talking about ROI and so forth, I'm happy to discuss with and I'll fire you and Vinay an email, and happy to discuss with you guys a little further if we can even tweak the list further. And if there are specific US markets that you think would be helpful, because I haven't added any of those, but especially in light of, if we can think of some potential up and coming international gateways that have these kind of ROI metrics that you're looking at, where we might be able to have data to support that could help maybe provide a more integrated picture for you.
I'd like to get the head of my research arm on the call too. We mine jobs IQ in particular, but if we had 3 or 4 markets and we could say, look, over the last 15 years, this is the growth of the infrastructure as measured by X, Y, and Z, and then here's the growth in jobs that parallel this on these 15 occupations we associate with this. I think that would be powerful. Nancy, I'll turn to you, but that's a quantitative evidence that if you're on this trajectory with the build out of your infrastructure, these are the kind of jobs that happen. And if we could parallel that with the kind of private sector investment or decisions to expand, that would be great.
Yeah, let me know.
Okay,
yeah.
That's great. All right, so we just have a few minutes left, and just want to share with you just a couple of little updates, and I'll just go into these. We made a strategic decision to shift the signatory from Virginia Beach to RVA 757 Connects, and we weren't originally doing this because there's a policy at Go Virginia that says, look, if you have a planning grant, you can't follow it with another planning grant. And that's there for good reason, but all policies are there for, to be guardrails. And sometimes you don't have to absolutely follow them every time. And in this case, the grant that we have with the 6 different funders that match this, it's really complicated for a city or a county to just manage it. And so we got to a point where we said, you know what, we ought to let RVA 757 Connects do it. We've done 3 other grants in the past with Go Virginia, and we just know how to do this. And so that decision was made, but now the paperwork has to get redone, and everybody at state level and Region 4 and Region 5 and RVA 757 Connects for executive committee, everybody's totally on board, and that paperwork's happening right now. So it just means we'll be able to move a little faster. What the consequence, though, is that we haven't been able to literally sign the contract with Vinay and John's organization to get them rip roaring. So they've been doing work on good faith, but we think by the middle of this week, we should be good to go. I mean, with all the nuances are done, but I just wanted you guys to know that. So we've been acting as the leader of this, and Virginia Beach was going to handle the finances and more of the paperwork, and now it's coming back to RVA 757 Connects. Nancy, does that capture it?
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add. I think it'll just streamline the whole process, just in terms of the management and the work. And, we certainly assured the city of Virginia Beach that, they were the applicant. Obviously, there'd be continued support.
Yeah.
So I think we're in a good place. Yes.
Okay. And Nancy heads up Region 5, Go Virginia, but the city of Virginia Beach is still going to be a major player in this, obviously, and they're one of the matching grantees. One of the folks that really stepped up to make this all happen. All right, we talked about this date in January. We're really going to need that because we've slowed down a little bit with the 2 consultants. And somebody mentioned, I can't remember who said that it's not a good date, January 17th. Look for the next week. So here's the date, January 26th, 10 a.m. to noon. I hope that works for everybody. And we've had it's interesting, Meta and has offered to have our meeting in their location. They could maybe only handle 25 or 30 people, but that seems to be about who shows up. Everybody said that it would be great to be inside of this building and meet there. And we think there's the capacity to also call in. So it would be like a virtual kind of, what do you call them, a hybrid meeting? Some people virtual, some people in person. So we're going to finalize this and get this out to you, but the date we're locking in, and hopefully we can do it here. And hopefully it'll work virtually as well. And so we feel like with these other 2 studies that are going on, well, 3 now, and Nancy identified a third one that's already done, but we can mine that we ought to make sure we incorporate their findings into our study. And then secondly, we got to be fair to global, to Interglobics and to telegeography, that they've been held back in their scope. They haven't started because of the contracting switch. So we want to add a date in February, and really what we'll do is review the next 2 meetings. We'll review their findings, and then we'll do a draft plan and get it to everybody, and then have a final meeting and get the final input on the plan. So CarMax has also said that their innovation center, they'd love to have us come and have a meeting there, and it does have that virtual capability as well. So I think it's probably important as we get to the we certainly have at least one in-person meeting out of these 3, but that's what we're thinking about. And then, the experts have been so great at this. There are 2 from the last breakout session. The recommendations came back to, it'd be great to have some experts on the future of data centers and terrestrial network players. So we really can learn about that, including someone from VDOT, and that would be helpful for our map as well. And then experts on the educational initiatives that are going on to support future jobs. These are 2 areas that you guys said, if we're going to have additional experts come in and present to us, like the Virginia Marine Association, Maritime Association, we should work on these 2 categories. And the last thing is, on December 6th, we are going to have another innovation spotlight, and Vinay and John are going to speak. And we really are just trying to bring everybody up to speed on the plan and the process and kind of where we are and why this is important. And so that we're queuing up for that. So any questions on that? That's sort of just the housekeeping items. Any suggestions? Those speakers sound good to try to line up some speakers in those categories? Okay. Well, thank you guys for hanging with us. It's right at 12 o'clock. I didn't think it would take all this time, but the great conversation. And we'll keep moving forward. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.